Coming Back is a listener-supported podcast. To support the show and get exclusive access to live grief support, podcast stickers, giveaways, and so much more, head on over to patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia. Support the show for as little as $1 per month and change or cancel your support at any time. Thank you so much for listening. Hi there, and welcome to Coming Back, a podcast about coming back to life after death, divorce, diagnosis, and more. On today's show, I'm talking to longtime Instagram friend Emily Ruth about grief and the body. Multiple miscarriages and the death of her twin sons are just a few of the losses that make her describe her grief like a plane crashing into the ground. Also on the show today, I'm sharing my Bereavement Cruise presentation with all of you. It's all about honoring secondary loss, the invisible, unspoken losses that often stay silent in the aftermath of death. I'm Shelby Forsythia, an intuitive grief guide who speaks, writes, and teaches powerful truths on grief and loss. My mom's death in 2013 set me on the path to becoming a lifelong student of grief, and I use what I learned to equip others with the knowledge to heal and remind them that they are not alone. Because even through grief, we are growing. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Coming Back. Thank you so much for listening today. This week, I am away from the mic and away from Chicago on the much anticipated, I can't believe it's finally here, 2019 Bereavement Cruise. If you are emailing me or texting questions to the show or commenting on my posts on Facebook, I promise you I will see them eventually, just when I return to the States on March 10th. Those of you who are on the boat with me, thank you so much, and I am so excited to meet you in person. I am recording this podcast, of course, in advance of our trip, but I am sure we are having a great time together on the Bereavement Cruise. Those of you who are tuning in, like usual, this week from your homes, from your cars, at work, etc., I want to share with you the workshop that I'm going to be teaching on board, which kind of like a mini condensed version, if you will, because the actual workshop itself is going to be about an hour and a half. Because I think this tool, what I'm sharing on board, is something that everyone can use. It's information that I think all of us need while we're grieving. And whether you couldn't make the trip due to work or money or health or kids or just a conflicting event this time of year, or maybe the bereavement cruise just didn't speak to you and your grief right now, I want you to be able to partake in this experience in some way. So here we go. The workshop I'm leading on board is called Honoring Secondary Loss, and it's all about giving voice to and giving words to all of the losses that seem to fall like dominoes around our big primary loss. Most everyone on the 2019 Bereavement Cruise has had a loved one die, so for all intents and purposes this week, I'll be working from the model of death of a loved one, although this can also apply to divorce, diagnosis, and other losses as well. So everybody knows, the world knows, your big primary loss. We'll call it the primary loss here. They know that your dad died, or your sister was killed in a car accident, or your best friend got cancer and died, or your dog was run over, or you had a miscarriage, or you lost a child, or your grandmother died in her sleep. Something has happened where your life has gone in such a way where someone you love has died. And that kind of big grief, this primary grief, is usually public. It's published in newspapers and online obituaries. There are ceremonies and memorial services for it. There are rituals to follow. And a lot of times, especially in our digital age these days, there are support groups for the kind of loss that you face, the specific brand of death that has rolled into your life. So the big loss, or the primary loss, whatever it is for you, is the loss that's seen on the outside. This is what the world sees. It's the one that people talk about when they talk about you, as in, oh, she lost her dad 6 weeks ago. Oh, he and her wife lost their baby. His grandmother just died. It's the loss that sits at the top of the pyramid and kind of dominates and trickles down and bleeds through every other element of your life. But the thing I want to talk about today, the focus of this workshop, is secondary loss. It's all of these other small, unspoken, minuscule, but very, very important losses that we face as a result of this big primary loss. There are secondary losses that come alongside it instantly, the things you lose the instant someone dies, the losses that are kind of revealed or reveal themselves to you over time, and the losses that you uncover and frankly are sometimes surprised by or shocked by. So in my own world, my big loss, my primary loss, was the loss of my mom. It totally tore my world apart. And when my family saw me, when my friends saw me, when my college professors saw me when I returned to school, the words out of their mouth were, "I'm so sorry for the loss of your mom." So my mom is the primary thing that I lost. But underneath and within and surrounding her death, I lost so much else, and these are what I would consider my secondary losses. So in this first category, the category of instant losses, things that happened instantaneously when she died, I lost my emotional idea of home. I felt like I no longer had a place to go home to. I lost faith in God and justice, and if we're just good enough, then we live happy and long lives. So something with religion and the meaning of life and the purpose of why we're here, the bottom absolutely fell out of that when she died. I lost, and this is a big one for all of us grief growers, the ability to touch, hug, hold, and be physically comforted by my mom. I lost the sound of her voice and the way she looked when she was standing in front of me. I lost the ability to get in touch with her whenever I wanted, in person or over the phone or on Facebook Messenger. So all of these things, I lost physical touch, I lost communication, and I lost my idea of home and safety and, frankly, innocence the moment she died. In the second category, this category of losses revealed over time. A lot of you know, if you've listened to earlier episodes of this show, I lost my creativity, something I realized a few months after my mom died. My joy to, make stuff was gone. I lost my health pretty drastically, growing very, very sick in the years following her death. It's something I'm still recovering from. I lost the person who was going to be the most proud of me at my graduation 6 months after her death. And then in that recognition, I recognized she would not be here for the other milestones. So for my wedding or moving to Chicago or all these other kind of trail markers as well. And over time, I'm continuing to realize that I'm losing her continued advice and perspective and it's just something I really feel that I continue to need, both for the good things and the bad things that are happening in my life. And lastly, in this third category, the category of losses that totally blindsided me and surprised me, I lost my voice for song, for music, something I was born with. I was singing before I could talk, and I didn't realize I had lost my voice until I started singing again 2 whole years after my mom died, and my voice sounded totally different than who I was before. And it's not that tonally it was different, it was just coming from a different place in my body, and I was like, whew, that's kind of unexpected and a little crazy. Second weird thing surprised me is I lost my ability to call any of my friends' moms mom, or anyone else in my life who jokingly referred to themselves as my mother. I'm like, the word mom will not escape my lips again unless I'm talking about my own mother. I lost a lot of my extroversion and prefer now to spend a ton of time kind of going through the world solo, where I used to not operate that way. And I lost, for a long time, my connection to other women, especially people who are my mother's age. And probably the most surprising thing to me, but probably the most normal thing that I lost when I lost my mom, I lost my ability to look at anyone I meet in the world without automatically thinking, oh, someday they're going to die. That's pretty jarring, this sudden realization that literally everyone around you is going to die. A big surprise. So, a primary loss is a big loss, grief growers, in and of itself. There are so many secondary losses underneath it, though, too, ones that don't get acknowledged or talked about or addressed the same way that our big primary losses do. They kind of get talked around in support groups and in online forums and in books and things like that, but they don't always get directly stared in the face and acknowledged. So some things I'm picked up from all of you in the Grief Growers Garden and from all of the books and things that I'm reading and continue to read, some secondary losses that we can have are losing our ability to think straight, to drive, to balance a checkbook. We can lose our money due to funeral costs, reckless behavior, having to become a caretaker for someone else all of a sudden. We can lose our identity, and this is a big one, as a daughter, as a spouse, as a friend, as a parent, as a son, as a primary caregiver, as a sister or a brother or a coworker. We can lose our minds or feel like we're losing our minds, manifesting as anxiety, depression, mental health issues, perhaps for the first time, insomnia, just overwhelming brain fog, this feeling that we're going crazy. We can, of course, lose our health through stress or diagnosable illnesses or those unexplainable aches and pains that sometimes crop up in the aftermath of loss. And we can lose our joy, expressing ourselves through art or music, or even just a desire to go outside. It is radically important that we honor our secondary losses by speaking them. Some people would phrase this as speaking them to power, speaking them to knowing, or bringing them into the light. It's really important that we identify them and say, oh, I see you. You, this loss, the secondary loss, you were part of the big loss, but no one has acknowledged you yet. No one has come and taken your hand and asked you to come along on the journey. And we don't walk up to people and say, I lost $10,000 in the last 2 months. I lost my primary sex partner. I lost my ability to eat. We say, my spouse died. And everything else related to it is kind of, it's below the surface. It's secret. It's hidden. It's quiet, you know? But keeping all of these secondary losses to ourselves does two things, grief growers. It keeps them small and secret and tiny and voiceless. And it can often make us feel like we're facing this landslide of unspoken losses all alone, all by ourselves. And from my perspective and in my experience, I feel like I can't come back from what I can't identify or give voice to. So even just saying something along the lines of like, in my mother's death, I feel like I lost my creativity. I'm like, oh, the creativity is gone. So maybe I need to create some kind of ritual for that, or maybe I can focus on other creative pursuits in the meantime, or try other outlets to bring it back. Or maybe I can look at it and say, maybe creativity is not necessary right now. But once you name it, you can start to befriend it and then start to make decisions about how you want to operate with this secondary loss as well. With every primary loss, there are secondary losses. Whether you realize and feel them instantly, or they show up with time, or they come up and surprise you, they certainly exist. And these secondary losses may feel even stronger or even worse than the primary loss. Please know that the phrasing of primary and secondary is not about strength or depth or emotion or pain. It's about what the world sees and acknowledges and what it does not. This is just a little snippet of what I'll be sharing this week on the 2019 Bereavement Cruise. I'll be sharing a post in my Facebook group, The Grief Growers Garden, about primary and secondary loss, and asking you to name some primary and secondary losses from your own life. So if you'd like to share with us, please join by clicking the link in the show notes or by searching The Grief Growers Garden on Facebook. You can also share your secondary losses with me live during my monthly hangout, which is taking place Monday, March 25th at 8 o'clock p.m. Central. All you have to do to join us is to pledge at any level on my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia. And of course, you can always find that link as well in the show notes. Next up, my conversation with Emily Ruth, who's talking about grief and the body after multiple miscarriages and the loss of her premature sons. One of the most helpful things I've found in my loss, grief growers, is a witness to my journey. Beyond feeling that I'm not alone, although that's extremely helpful in the aftermath of loss, I feel like by sharing my story with someone else, I have a sounding board, a guide, and someone who's just a little bit farther ahead on the road than I am. There is camaraderie and small, growing strength and confidence in finding a grief coach who can companion you, walk alongside you, and you're coming back. I want to be the person to hold this space for you on a one-on-one level. If you're looking for more focused attention on your heart, whether you're coping with death, divorce, diagnosis, or something else, please head to shelbyforsythia.com/grief-coaching to receive more information about the types of grief coaching I offer and to fill out an interest form. That's shelbyforsythia.com/grief-coaching. I'm here to be your companion, toolbox, and shoulder in grief. You can also find a link in the show notes. Emily Ruth is acquainted with a variety of grief journeys, including death, divorce, chronic health issues, and infertility. She has reclaimed her life amidst these struggles and enjoys supporting other women in doing the same through reconnecting with their bodies. Emily is a dancer, writer, teacher, lifelong learner, coach, and former doula. She is married and has 4 children, 2 of which are living, and even though she only has 1 cat, she totally embraces the term cat lady. In fact, she sees it as a compliment. Emily loves herbal tea, roller skating, and supporting women through all kinds of transitions, birth, death, and everything in between. Emily Ruth, I am so delighted to have you on the show today because we've been circling each other's orbits on Instagram for quite a long time. And I love just how honest you are in your posts about grief and loss, about our bodies, about emotions, about just like being alive in the world and how devastating and how amazing that can often be. So I'm excited to have you on the show as a guest and to have you share your stories with us. And the first story, of course, that we'll introduce is, of course, your loss story and relationship with grief.
Well, Shelby, I want to thank you for having me on the show. I've been a longtime listener and follower and have really benefited from all your guests who have so generously shared their lost stories with us. It's an honor to hear their stories, and I am grateful for the opportunity to share mine with you and your listeners today. So, in the past, I've really struggled to know how to share my lost story. I haven't quite known how to tell it. Not that there's one right way, but I wouldn't say I felt like I could really capture the essence of my experience in the past. And in thinking about why that is, I've realized it is because I feel like mine is really a losses story. While there is kind of one definitive moment of loss, it really just felt like it was 10 long years of loss after loss after loss compounded. And I'm certain that many of your listeners resonate with that feeling. I've had this image in my mind, um, comparing it to a plane flight. So I'm on a plane flight. I'm going on this trip, planning to arrive at some beautiful destination. I've got my bags packed. I think I have everything and everyone I need with me. And then there is this unexpected crash landing. And there is one big initial hit to the earth. It's rough, but the plane keeps skidding and colliding with things as it goes along. Parts of the wreckage are just flying off the plane as we go along. And it's not just one collision, it's a series of hits and crashes. And that is really what the last 10 years felt like. So I'll share what led up to the catalyst loss, if you will, and then briefly get into the series of smaller losses that followed. I married young. I met my first husband my freshman year of college, and we got married when I was 19. I did turn 20 soon after that, but I was 19 when we married. I was a performer, a dance major in school, and an actress by trade. So I didn't plan to have children right away. I really just wanted to dance and enjoy married life. So our first pregnancy was not planned. And after taking that test, I was really nervous and unsure of how my life plans were going to shift. But I knew that at some point I wanted to be a mother, and I was married to a really gentle man who I knew would make a great dad. So I very quickly got into the head and heart space of making room for this baby in our family. And just after we had announced our pregnancy, so I think it was around 13 weeks, we lost that baby to miscarriage. And I felt surprised by the grief that came along with that loss. I know that you've had some guests on your show who have spoken to that experience of miscarriage, and it's really tough. and tough that it's not much talked about. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't really have the coping skills to deal with that loss. And so I dove right back into my education, into my passion. I was also dancing professionally by that point. So I just really, focused on my work and kind of brushed that experience under the rug. I didn't allow myself to feel it. Um, a few years later, we were eventually able to have our first son. I was 26 and just primed for being a mother. I felt so ready. And I had a beautiful, empowering pregnancy and birth. I realized that I intensely loved the experiences of pregnancy and birth and getting so in tune with my body. I loved researching everything I could about it. I actually became a trained birth doula. If your listeners know what that is, a doula supports women in pregnancy and birth. So I loved it. And about 10 months after our son was born, I became pregnant again. And I had wanted my children to have siblings close in age and to have close relationships. So I was really excited for this pregnancy. At around 14 weeks, I had some bleeding. And I thought I was miscarrying again. By this point, I'd had a handful of miscarriages that I'd kind of, like I said, just kind of pushed them under the rug. I didn't really allow myself to feel them. So when we went in for the ultrasound, I was preparing to hear once again that my baby didn't have a heartbeat. And I braced myself for that. But what we heard was that not only did my baby have a strong heartbeat, but that there were two strong heartbeats. And I was ecstatic. To this day, there have been very few moments where I felt such joy just electrify my body. I felt so deeply, it was like every square inch of my body just felt, the hair on my head felt excited. It was amazing. It was such a beautiful experience. And we had been seeing a midwife. I had had my first son at home with a midwife, and so we were seeing a midwife. But after discovering we were having twins, we transferred care to an obstetrician. And they ran all the tests and did all the things that they do with a twin pregnancy to make sure that things were progressing well and that everyone was healthy. And it all just felt so exciting. And, but at about 20 weeks, so about halfway through my pregnancy, things really shifted. And this melancholy mood sort of settled into my being. I started having these premonitions. I started having dreams that something wasn't right with my babies, that something wasn't right with my pregnancy. And I could still tell you about 10 vivid moments that I felt this. I asked my doctor to do all the tests to double check that things were good. Everything looked fine. Shelby, they couldn't find one thing. I was told I was in the healthiest category of women. My babies were in the healthiest categories of twin pregnancies. I had been active. I ate well. My babies looked great. It all looked okay. But I didn't feel okay in my heart. I remember one day I had taken my son for a walk in his stroller. At this point, I think he was a little bit over a year old. And we were walking around the block on this cloudy day. And I remember so distinctly looking up at the sky. The clouds were gathering just right above me, full dark clouds. It was like exquisite. And it looked beautiful and sad. And I just remember feeling grief stricken, like inexplicably so. In fact, this was really before cell phone cameras were a thing. So that tells you how long ago this was. But I had gotten into the habit of taking a small digital camera with me to capture all my older son's little moments. He was just over a year. And so I wanted to catch all these moments, the new facial expressions, the new discoveries, the smiles, all of that. So I carried this little camera around with me everywhere. And so when I looked up into the cloudy sky and I felt this overwhelming grief, I actually took a picture. I somehow knew this was a moment I needed to take in and even document. It was a clear premonition for me that something was coming. The night before my babies were born, so it was actually the night before Halloween, we had been watching comedy shows on television. I was like trying to boost this, shake this melancholy mood and boost my mood. And I just couldn't laugh. Like all of our favorite shows, I couldn't laugh. And I told my husband I just wanted to go to bed, and I did. And I woke up during the night briefly, and I remember hearing the train that runs a few miles away. And in fact, I lived 2 streets from where we lived at that time. I live 2 streets from there now, and I can still hear the train at night. But I woke up and I heard this train, and I had the thought that someone was leaving my life. It didn't make sense rationally, but it was so vivid. And the next morning, I woke up and decided to call the doctor. I told them something was off, something didn't feel right. But that wasn't a physical sensation. It was an emotional one. And so they asked me if I had had any bleeding or contracting, and I hadn't. So I was told that, this pregnancy would feel different than my previous one because this was twins and that was a singleton, and I shouldn't worry. And I didn't know how to tell the nurse that I knew something was wrong. I hung up and immediately called a midwife that I had a relationship with and shared what I was feeling emotionally. And she took me very seriously. She called another one of her friends, a perinatologist at a local hospital, and actually got me an appointment that very hour. She called me right back and said, she's waiting for you now. She has I think she was like free before her lunch or whatever. She had some free time. And she said, pack a bag in case you end up needing to stay. And so I immediately started packing a bag, just kind of frantically. I felt this urgency. I started packing this bag, and about halfway through packing, I dropped to my knees in labor. It was like 0 to 60, and it was so intense. I had had a baby not long before, it was just a little over a year before. And so I knew what real labor felt like. And this was real. It's like I was suddenly in pushing phase within a minute of going into labor. It was like I felt nothing. And then I was almost ready to push. I knew I didn't have time to even wait for an ambulance. So my husband rushed me to the hospital just a few minutes down the road. And within a few minutes of arriving, Sheldon, the older of the 2 twins, was crowning. And I remember the doctor holding my face in her hands. It was like time stopped. And it felt like a movie of someone else's life, but this was my life. I was living it. I remember her saying, Emily, these babies are coming right now, and they're not going to make it. They are just too little. And I knew it. I had known it. We didn't want to take extraordinary measures, hooking our babies up to tubes and IVs when I knew they weren't going to survive. I had felt that. I knew they weren't meant for that. So we took the time that we had with them to hold them, and we heard their heartbeats. We, put the stethoscope on their heartbeats, and we heard their heartbeats. The second twin, Thomas, even opened his eyes, which the nurses were just amazed by. Babies that small don't often open their eyes. They were born at 23 weeks. And those were really sacred moments. And I don't regret that decision to hold them. I'm so glad that we had that time with them. They each lived for less than an hour. And every year I light candles on Halloween morning at 11:25 and 11:26 a.m. when they were born. And it's sort of the way I honor their lives and their places in their family, in our family. And that experience, it changed me. It continues to change me in so many ways. It changed our family. It rocked our world. And ultimately, our little family doesn't look the same as it did. Like I said, the loss of our twins sort of set off this series of difficult circumstances. We hadn't had health insurance. We were so poor and didn't have health insurance. And this was during the economic crash of 2008. So financially, it killed us. We went bankrupt. We lost our home, our car. It was really difficult times. And, this last October marked 10 years since they were born. So I've had some time and distance from the real epicenter of all of that. We did have one more son a few years later, who I'm so grateful for. I'm glad that um, that my older son has a brother. I'm glad my younger one has an older brother. They just are the sweetest little buddies, and both of those living sons from that marriage are just such lights. But my former husband and I, we split up about a year after our last son was born, and it's just a lot. It was a heck of a decade.
I'm kind of taking a breath and having a moment here because I personally, I don't know if any of the listeners of our show have ever been in a room with a baby that's been born premature. I have not. And so registering like what this experience is like is really hard for me. And so as you've been telling this story, I've conjured up this image of like a very, very, very small bird, like just these tiny little fragile things. And there's so much that they're constructed of. And yet, you can't, they're just so fragile. And I'm just absorbing that image, like, holy crap, like my heart hurts, to think of this story for you. And I've written so many things down from your journey already. The first word on my page right now is plane crash. And I can see how you got there with this story. Like, holy hell. And the first thing that I want to explore is something else I wrote down, and that is the grief of not being believed. Because I feel like you to me, my perception of you as we've been orbiting each other on the internet for as long as we have such a strong connection with your intuition, and even to go so far as to have dreams and to be like receiving, like downloading messages from the sky and from trains, and like inanimate objects are delivering these things to you and you are open to them. And yet to be bringing these things to doctors and to medical professionals is like, and to not be believed, I think there's immense grief in that.
Wow, I'll be honest, that is not something I think I've explored for myself. I know to some degree, I know that I've held some energy around the fact that I called that morning. I can't remember if I said that, but that the morning of, I called the doctors, and they said, "Well, it's gonna feel different from your first pregnancy. This is a twin pregnancy, and it's gonna feel different from a singleton." And it was like, no matter how many times I said, "No, but I I feel like there's something wrong. I It's not just different. It's not just that it feels different with 2 babies in my belly. It's not that. It's something's wrong." And I have had some sense that, like, I've had to work through some anger around that, not being believed there, but I don't think that I've really explored the fact that I've had the dreams and the deep impressions, and that those weren't really believed. The first one who acknowledged them was when I told my friend who was the midwife, and she said, "No, I you trust a mother's intuition. Let me call." And she called her friend right away, and I think really the only reason anyone listened to her is because she's, the midwife. She's a medical professional, and so, but my voice as a mother, it kind of meant nothing, and I don't know that I have explored it in the way that you're talking about, and it is really deep.
Yeah, and I think this happens in motherhood grief, but I think it also happens in like the larger umbrella of grief too. Like where people get these hunches or these dreams or these signs that they immediately pick up on. They're like, something is happening. There's another episode of Coming Back that aired earlier in this season. And this woman, as her husband was in the hospital and they were trying to figure out exactly what was wrong, she called her friend, and the first thing she said was, "I'm going to be a widow." And he wasn't even dead yet. And she just knew. She's like, I knew. She's like, I didn't know the weight, the gravity of all of that, but I knew that that was going to be my reality in a very short period of time. And it was in 3 weeks' time. And I think there's so much emotionally and with grief and with intuition that gets discounted because it doesn't show up in the physical world. And it can't a lot of times. I think a lot of what we feel or what we intuit or what we believe to be true, there's nothing for us to hold on to. And then there's an isolation, almost like a, am I crazy in the midst of this too? Because nobody believes me. I feel this with every fiber of my being. You said grief from the head to the bottom of your feet. Like that's a full body, something's happening. And I just think that's something that gets so discounted and so brushed away in our culture, unless we're talking about like talking to God or like woo-woo spirituality kind of stuff. We forget that it's intertwined in the everyday. Like you had this dream and then you probably like got up and made breakfast and took care of your almost 1-year-old. Like this is incorporated with your daily life, but also these things have incredible messages for us. So I just want to say like, thank you for sharing those with us, because those are powerful and very personal moments.
Well, thank you for hearing it. I don't know if you want to hear any more any more of that story.
Yeah.
There is kind of a part B, and the part B of that is so that marriage with my older kids. So I had another son after my twins, and that marriage ended soon after. We couldn't make it through the wreckage. We just couldn't. It was a lot on our little family, and years went by. I remarried. I'm remarried now, and we married. We're coming up on 3 years, and um, I again started experiencing miscarriages. So we had 3 losses. Well, 4. I had miscarriages, and then my last pregnancy before my youngest son, I had an ectopic pregnancy, and that was another experience where I wasn't believed. I had made an appointment with a doctor. I wasn't feeling well. I had had what we thought was another miscarriage, and I wanted to be checked out. And I went in, and the doctor, I, medical professionals, there is so much good that comes from Western medicine, but sometimes I feel like, at least in my experience, that like I shared before, is that when you're not believed, you feel like, well, what do I do with that? I don't have a medical degree. I'm not the quote professional, so what do I do with the fact that I still don't feel well? Um, so I went in, well, I had called, and they said, well, we can't get you in right away. And I said, well, I had a miscarriage. I'm still not feeling well. And they asked me a few questions. Is this happening? Is that happening? And I said, no, none of that's happening, but I don't feel well and something's not right. And this is a pattern. I've had several miscarriages. And they said, well, we can't get you in right away unless you're having these symptoms. And so they were going to get me in, I think, in like 3 days or something. And in the meantime, I didn't know that my ectopic pregnancy had actually ruptured in my body. And I started bleeding internally.
Oh, God.
And long story short, I barely got to the hospital in time. I have a friend that came over, and I thought I must have the stomach flu. I thought, well, I'm nauseous, I'm getting sick. This must just be a stomach flu. And I had a friend that dropped in unannounced, basically. She just felt like she had to be there. She said, Emily, there's no way I can describe it. I knew I had to drive to your house, and I knew I had to basically let myself in and stay until the feeling went away. That was her description of it. And I tried to send her away several times. I felt so sick. And I mean, if you can imagine having the stomach flu, I finally like basically crawled to the bathroom and I yelled to her in the other room. I said, Allison, you can go home. Basically, I don't want you here. I don't feel well. And she insisted on staying. And finally, she came in and said, Emily, something's not right. We can call the ambulance, or I can drive you to the hospital, but you're not going to the hospital. And I had felt so humiliated, I think, in previous experiences that, that I thought something was wrong, and I was basically told I was crazy or like it's all in my head. And I finally let her. I said, okay, take me to the hospital. She drove me to the hospital. They wheeled me in. They took me into the maternity section because I had been pregnant, even though I had miscarried. And I looked at the ER and I knew the wait was way too long. I was going to be there for hours before anyone saw me. And I thought, well, I've been pregnant recently, so take me to the maternity ward. I can get in quicker because there was no one in that hallway. And so she, they wheeled me in, and they did an ultrasound, and immediately I looked up on the monitor, and it was one of those ultrasounds where it was like things lit up, and my whole stomach on the monitor was red, like the blood was just everywhere. And so it was an emergency surgery. They wheeled me right back. There was like no time. My husband had just shown up because my friend had called him, and my husband had just walked in, and they just were informing him, your wife is going in for surgery. And so they had to remove my fallopian tube, and I had no warning. Like I just felt so shocked, and it was traumatizing, in that way. And so that's kind of what I mean by the plane wreckage. Like it just kind of kept going. Losing our twins and then losing my marriage. It was the death of my marriage, and then several more miscarriages. I've been pregnant more times than I can count on my hands. And then losing my fallopian tube, part of my body. And that was a grief that I was not expecting, to have such deep feelings and grief over losing a part of what makes me a woman. Um, and so that's kind of the to make a short story long.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak more on that? That grief of losing a part of your body, especially something that defines you as a gender, as a identity that is so. I mean, it's inside of you. It's no longer inside of you, but it was inside of you. But is also like, this is so energetically and symbolically tied to being a woman as well.
Yes. Well, like I said, it was a grief process that I was not expecting. I had talked to friends who had elective surgery, like, they're having a hysterectomy or something that they're choosing. And even that was a grief process, even when they chose it. So I don't know quite why I wasn't prepared, or why I didn't think that I would feel that same way. But I came out of surgery, and 2 weeks later, I'm like expecting myself to be fine. And I wasn't fine, Shelby. I wasn't fine. It took well over a year for even just my physical healing. And my scar, it's been, let's see, it's been almost 2 years since that surgery, and it's still really tender. My body is still coming to terms with the fact that I was cut, and it was an emergency surgery, so it's not like a really pretty cut. It it was intense. That whole experience was intense, and like I said, it's taken me a long time to get to a point of healing. I couldn't really walk. I had been really active before. I had, in my younger years, I was a professional dancer and very in tune with my body. And my oldest son, I think I mentioned, I had him at home. I had really empowering birth experiences with my son, my living sons, and I had been really active, and after this surgery, it it robbed me. I felt robbed. That's the only way I can describe. I felt robbed. I felt like something had been taken from me. Um, like that you said it so beautifully, that a part that defined my gender. Um, and that has been. I'll admit, I wouldn't say that I'm completely over it. I'm still kind of navigating and sifting through all that has brought to my doorstep. And in many ways, it's been beautiful, because I feel like it's led me to some healing modalities that I was not familiar with, didn't know very much about. Um, and so in many ways, it's been kind of a gift, a strange gift, if I can call it that, because it has led me down some paths that have been really beautiful. But it definitely has been difficult. And my family has had to really. My husband has been so good, but he's had to kind of help me pick up some pieces, and each piece I pick up and I look at, like, he has to sit with me to, it's like I need witness. I need someone to witness what I'm experiencing. And he's done it. I wouldn't I wouldn't say it's been easy for him, but he has willingly done it and sat witness for me. And as I've cried and mourned the loss of my body, what it was before and what it is becoming even, it's been a ride. I don't know if that's what you were looking for when you said to talk more about that, but that's what it's been like.
I think that's just so perfectly phrased. And the thing that immediately just popped into my head is like, I need a witness because I'm not crazy. Like
Yeah.
the exhale that we receive from having someone sit with us and just be like, yeah, this is real. Even if it's not the same thing that we're agreeing on, it's like, yes, this is the experience that you're having right now. And there is so much. It doesn't make anything feel better. You still feel like crap, but you're like, I'm slightly less alone than I thought I was in this. And I think it makes just the tiniest difference, and yet it makes all the difference in the world. I want to ask a question that also comes up in a lot of griefs, but especially with the grief of miscarriage as well as losing babies. And that is, as well as like a lot of medical procedures happening to you, in you, at you. And that is, do you feel like your body belongs to you?
Wow. That is a really powerful question. Um, I think for me through this process, I think it has caused me to, well, I don't want to say it's forced me, but it has definitely led me to the point of stepping into my body in a in a deeper way, a more full way. I don't know how else to say that, but it's like I've had to fight to be in my body.
Yeah.
I mean, because literally I've almost, and I didn't even tell you about another previous surgery that I had that was in another emergency surgery. All of these experiences have brought me to the point of wanting to fight to stay here and fight to stay on this planet. Not just for my kids or my husband, but like for myself. Like when having those experiences, I realized how much I wanted, that there was still so much I wanted to do here. And so this idea of embodiment really being in my body, I've had to kind of fight for it. And I think now I'm so much more in my body than I was in my 20s and my teens for certain, because I've had to fight for it. And I don't know, is that what you're asking? Maybe I should have you repeat the question.
No, I think that's very well phrased, and kind of, I mean, however the experience shows up for you is however the question should be answered, because this is not a podcast where I'm ever looking for specific answers to anything.
Okay,
It's literally just us having an intuitive journey together, because these questions I have no idea where they're coming from. When I ask questions
oh,
of guests on the show, I'm like, for some reason, this needs to be asked. And
oh, I
sometimes they
love
repeat
that.
themselves, like, tell us your lost story is the anchor and all of them. And that's what we always come back to, is this is where we find unity, is what is your lost story. But everything else, it just comes through. It's a wild process. I have to listen to interviews again before they go to air because I forgot what I said. Like it's a process. But I literally wrote down in all capital letters, do you feel like your body belongs to you? Because like so much, especially in the medical system, especially in the westernized world, there's so much of being like whisked away and rolled away and gone into surgery and cut open and all this other stuff that rarely, like, we toe the line of consent a lot, or autonomy or sovereignty in the medical world. And it's such a hard thing to reckon with in grief, because it's not something that's happening outside of us. It's happening to us and on us and in us. And it's something
Oh, wow.
it's something that our hearts not only have to heal from, but our entire bodies. Like there's a visible and like a physical thing that we have to patch up from. And it's so hard to feel like we continue to belong to ourselves when so many actions have been taken on our bodies and in our bodies that were not orchestrated by us. And I think this bleeds into pardon the bleeding term, but like this bleeds into like sexual trauma and abuse and violence and forced abandonment or isolation when things happen to our bodies that we do not want to happen to them or were not of our choosing. I think there's almost like I'm getting chills. It's like a rehoming process. We have to remember how to come home to ourselves when home doesn't look like home anymore, or home doesn't feel like home anymore.
God. Yes. Yes, when home doesn't look like home anymore. That's exactly how I felt, Shelby. Like, I came home from the hospital and, and they say things like, well, it'll be 6 weeks. There'll be like this healing process. And then, but you'll really feel better like in 3 months. I remember this timeline. So I'm thinking in my head, okay, I'm going to feel at home. I'm going to feel like myself in 3 months or whatever. Oh my gosh, no. I don't look the same. I have this, and at first, like the scar was so like, I hate to use this word, but it felt hideous to me. I felt like, oh my gosh, this huge, I mean, and it's huge. It's a large scar. And like I said, because it wasn't planned, it's not beautifully stitched up. And as grateful as I am for that, help was there for me when I needed it. I'm glad I'm alive. My heavens, I'm glad I'm alive. But my body does not feel the same. And it's never going to feel the same. And it's gotten better. I feel better, but it's not ever going to be the body. And I'm okay with that now, but it's taken almost 2 years to get to a place where I feel at home again. And it's been, I would even say, just the last few months that I've stumbled on a few more of these tools that have really helped me somatically get back to where I'm feeling like, okay, this body is my home. It's really only been the last few months, and that's a long time to feel out of my body.
To feel homeless. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of saying that.
I wrote a piece a while ago. A lot of people don't know that there's a blog in tandem with the podcast, but there is. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a piece about when grief makes you feel homeless, but it was actually in the context of a physical space, like when the physical space of home changes after someone dies. And like their presence is no longer in the home, but also if there's still people living in the home, things get moved around and they're not where they used to be. And you come home, you're like, well, that doesn't belong to me anymore. But it can also be translated to our bodies. And I think there's something so like grief is already an isolating experience, but we almost get like double and triple whammied when the building is no longer home, the body is no longer home, the brain is no longer home. Like, where the hell are we? It's like we just get dumped off on the side of the road somewhere, and it's like, okay, find your way home. And you're like, but which way my compass is broken. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. and it's you're like, you have given me no backpack, a defective compass, and I'm wearing flip flops. Like, this is going to be the worst movie of my whole life. And we literally just like start down the road in one direction, and eventually, if that doesn't work, you just like turn around and start going in another. And I say that, and it sounds very flippant and like it could be in a like cutesy movie or something, but like it is devastating to walk for miles and miles and miles and then realize I am farther from where I started. I want to ask because you talked about your tools several times. Maybe if you could share with us some of the ones, like maybe the top 3 or 4 that have helped the most to come back to that beacon or that rehoming process for you.
These are the things that have really, the last few months especially, have been really beneficial to me. The first thing is, it's called alchemical alignment, and it's by, and I want to say her name right. That's why I was like worried that I didn't have it right, because I want to say her name right. Her name is Bridget Vixmans. I'm not sure. I know she lives in the District of Columbia, but I'm not sure where that name comes from. But I think she's not from the United States. So I know you probably have listeners all over the world. So she's somewhere else, I think. And her work is called alchemical alignment. And I just purchased, she has, I'm sure if you Google her, you can find her. But I stumbled on her work, I think through a podcast. I think she did some interview. And it's kind of like, to me, it feels like a blend of Tai Chi and some other kind of movement. It's not exactly like Tai Chi, but it's like it pulls both parts of your brain together with your body. Like after I do her movement sequence, that's what it's called, is the movement sequence. Um, I just feel like my body and my brain and my heart are all connected. So I don't know what that means to anyone else, but it has been really hugely beneficial to me. Bridget Vixen's and alchemical alignment, the alignment sequence, that's what it's called. Another resource that has been really helpful to me has been Perry Nicholson on Instagram. He's called Stop Chasing Pain. He's got his body of work is really broad, but he has a lot of stuff, even just free content on his Instagram page that he helps people really tune in and get their bodies, back in sync with their hearts and their minds, I feel like. And then another one, and I'm not sure exactly why this has been so helpful to me in terms of getting my body in sync with my spirit and my mind and my heart, is Randy Buckley. She has a group called Healthy Boundaries for Kind People. And I think for me in all of this, learning proper boundaries has been a huge piece. And now I'm kind of connecting that to what we were talking about earlier with the medical field. I think I was a bit in shock and traumatized after that whole experience, not because not because I didn't need the surgery. I absolutely did. But I think had I had healthier boundaries and known how to articulate myself in the moment, I maybe could have asked for things that, I mean, I won't go into detail, but there are a few things that happened that I think if I had had my wits about me and had healthier boundaries, that I could have maybe requested a few things were different in that experience. And so anyway, Randy Buckley, Healthy Boundaries for Kind People, her work has been really beneficial to me as well. And none of those are grief. They're not centered on grief, by the way. But they've been helpful to me in my journey. So,
and they don't always have to be. I tell podcast listeners a lot that the book that really sparked inspiration for my own coming back was called The Happiness Project, which is like the exact opposite of grief.
I love that book. It's a fantastic book, and I actually can totally see why. Mm-hmm. I can totally see why that would be beneficial.
The short story of it is that there's a part in the book where she says, if you want to have a happier life, do the things that you used to do as a child. And one of mine was going to the library with my mom and my sister. And in an effort to reconjure that memory, I got a library card for the first time as an adult and started going to the library. But everything I wanted to read, I was like, well, what am I interested in? Because I don't really know myself as a reader anymore, because the standardized school system will beat that out of you. Right. And I was like, well, what do I want to learn? And then I was like, well, I want to learn about what I'm going through. I want to learn about grief. And then in like the course of a year, I think I read anywhere from like 20 to 40 books about grief. And I had all this wisdom. I say wisdom. I had all of this like reference material in my brain. And I was like, why aren't more people talking about this? And then through a long series of events, combined with a lot of people telling me I should, that's how the podcast was born and how the work I do was born. But it was mostly just this curiosity and this like spark moment of like, oh, I could do something with that. But it's always I refer to this over and over and over again. It came up in a previous episode of Coming Back. I'm actually not sure what season it's in anymore. We're in season 5 right now. But it's about how grief is like an involuntary scavenger hunt. And you're kind of always trying things on to see if they fit. And if they don't, you can kind of put it down and go on to the next thing. And it's tricky sometimes because we get attached to things for a while and then we wear them for a while and they're like, it doesn't really fit anymore. And so sometimes things will come in seasons, and then sometimes things don't have a grief label on them. Like this thing about setting healthy boundaries, like that's important when you're grieving, to be able to set boundaries with the people around you, but it's not necessarily like the dominant thing that a lot of people are thinking of in grief. And yet it is. So it kind of depends on what you're seeking. So I'm glad you shared those with us. I'll actually put a link to all 3 of those underneath your work in the show notes as well. So if people want to go explore them, they certainly can. I want to veer into a totally different direction at this moment and talk about your living sons, because I have seen wonderful pictures of them. They have just like such cool energy about them. But with this entire legacy, this journey, this plane crash that you have lived in a continued effort to get pregnant, stay pregnant, deliver babies that live. Like, what is the story that you're telling your sons or are going to tell your sons about your life as a woman?
Mm. Mm. My life as a woman. Well, I'll just say it's kind of an ongoing conversation. I'm not with my in public, I'm actually really shy, which maybe on social media, maybe that isn't apparent. I don't know. But in person, like in groups, I'm actually really pretty shy. I love one-on-ones. I love talking to one or maybe two people. Um, but at home, I'm an open book with my family, and I just kind of have always been talking about where I'm at with my kids. I think I'm not sure where I got this from, but, as I think as a kid, I always wanted to know what was going on with my parents because, kids are so perceptive and we feel kind of all the ripples of what's going on, but we don't always know what's causing the ripples. And I think as a kid, I was always really curious, but never really knew or got answers from any of the adults around me. I was the youngest of four kids, and my mom was a little bit older when she had me, so all my siblings are quite a bit older than me. And so I always just felt like I was wanting answers and no one would tell me. I was like the little kid running around trying to get answers and everyone was, older and maybe they thought I couldn't handle it. I don't know, but I know as a kid I was very aware that stuff was going on and I didn't know what it was. So that's it's a really long way of saying I've always been very open with my children. And so even when, my oldest son, he was a little over a year old when we had our twins, I wanted him to see them. So we brought him to the hospital. They brought him to the hospital and he got to hold them. He was a year old, but like we kind of sat next to him and he had that experience and even remembers when he was really, really little, that whole experience. And my son Danny, because we always were, it was an open topic, and my oldest son would talk about it, like his brothers. Oh yeah, Sheldon and Thomas. Remember when they were born? Like he would just randomly say things. I don't know. We'd be driving somewhere, and he would just randomly say something. And so it was kind of always in the air. They've kind of always been a part of our family, even though they're not living. And so even Danny, who was born after, and I'm giving the names of my kids. I don't normally do that, but since I feel so comfortable, I'm sharing with you part of my life. But um, my boys have always kind of known that we have this relationship with Sheldon and Thomas, even though they aren't here on this earth. And that is part of my experience of being a mother, being a woman. I know not all women are want to be mothers even or have that inclination, but for me, that has been a huge part of my womanhood. Bearing children, having children, raising children. My youngest, so I just had a baby. He's 3 months old this week, and I had my two older boys were at the birth, and the photos, I had a photographer there, the photos that she took of my boys there with me while I was in labor are honestly, if my house were to catch fire, that would be what I would take. My computer with my pictures, because those images of my boys being there for me and witnessing, a pinnacle, I feel like it's a pinnacle experience for me as a woman giving birth. Having them be in that space and bearing witness, we talked about bearing witness earlier. That's another experience, that bearing witness, having my children and my husband there to bear witness with me as I'm having, their brother, their son. I don't know, it's transformative to me, and it's an experience that we've talked about even since. It's kind of an ongoing, I'm rambling here maybe, but it's been so impactful for my little family. And, my kids to be there at the birth of their brother, it's just pretty cool. I don't know how else to describe it, and it was really healing. Really what I'm getting to is that experience was such a healing thing for me, after all of these losses. This plane crash that kind of just, it was like the plane hit the ground and parts are flying everywhere and it just is skidding and parts are continue to fly. And then it rolls and tumbles. And it's like, I feel like that birth somehow pulled all the pieces back together. I mean, I look different. I'm not the same person that I was before I had my twins. And that's okay. I think I've grown. I like to think I've grown. I like to think that all these experiences have helped me get a better grasp about life and have more empathy for other people, and a variety of just people's lives. We all have such different experiences, but it's like the human experience. Like, what are we all experiencing? And I think it boils down to we all have hard stuff, and that's okay. Like, that's what I feel like for me, my hard stuff has kind of been this tailored curriculum to help me find the person I am right now. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what feels true to me. That all this hard stuff, all the grief that I've experienced, it's brought me to really beautiful things in my life. And sometimes it's just hard. Sometimes, honestly, I don't know what the point is. Like, I don't know that there's any great plan. When some things happen, I'm like, I don't know if this is part of a plan. Like, I'm a believer. I'm a God-fearing person, but I don't know that everything that happens in my life is like part of some great plan. But I do know I've learned from all of it. I do know that.
Yeah. And I think that comes with that sense of being tuned in, also a desire to look at it and keep looking at it to keep that conversation ongoing, which I love how you phrase that, because it's such a drastic turnaround from how you were raised. And I don't know if you're purposely doing it to rebel against the system in which you were raised, but you're like, well, you guys didn't talk about anything. We're going to talk about everything, and they're going to watch me give birth.
Everything, like literally everything. My kids, we've had all kinds of conversations that had to be the way I went about it, because that's what I needed or what I wanted as a kid. And so that's what I guess I still want that as an adult.
Yeah. And I think that's our, this is going to be a bold statement, but I think that's our natural state, to have these things be so open and to have these conversations be ongoing and to not have anything that's like off the table or behind closed doors. I think that's our nature, which is why it's often so hard to grieve, because the way that the world responds to grief is cover it up, put it away, don't tell anybody about it. This doesn't really belong to you. Like it's disregarded as an experience, and its solution, quote unquote, if you can call it giving a solution to grief, is not being fixed, but to be witnessed. And that's it. Like, that's how we make it through to the other side. That's how we end up learning. Because I don't know that any of us enter into these life experiences with like, I'm going to learn something from this. Yeah. I'm on a mission.
Oh, good. I'm so excited. I'm having this challenge.
Oh my gosh. We do not enter into any of these things with delight or a hopeful anticipation or anything. But that is what comes. But it comes with being witnessed and with doing the work too, with finding these things that speak to us, even if they're not related to grief. So I think that's a cool like permission that you inserted in here, is like, you don't have to have it be related to grief for it to help you, which I think is just so powerful. As we're kind of rolling to the end of our conversation, I want to let people know where they can find you, but especially your Instagram, because I have seen these pictures from I was literally crying on the bus. I was literally crying on the CTA because you pair your story with these photos so well, and you took your time and made it into a series. And I just thought it was so incredibly powerful. And as a woman who at this point in her life does not think she will ever be having children, it was just one of those things where it's like, wow, I get to see through that lens for the first time. And that's just powerfully cool, is like the phrase that's coming to mind for me.
Yeah, I love that that's how you experienced it, because I know that not every woman wants that experience, but I think just like there's many things I will probably never skydive, but man, it's sure cool to like hear other people talk
Yeah.
about that. Maybe that's an example, but I learn from other people and their experiences. So I'm glad that's how you see it too.
Yeah. And there's also, I mean, you can see the strife and the celebration in it too, especially following you for as long as I have. I'm like, oh, I see how we got here. And not just like logistically, like you guys made a baby, but like it, like, but not the science of it, but the journey of this has been more than this day, which is just really cool. So there's a lot of backstory that comes up too, and I think that it's important that you've been taking that with you. There's never been a time when that whole story hasn't followed you or been a part of you, which is just really cool. So yes, let people know where they can find you and the work that you do.
Okay, so my Instagram is Emily Ruth _. There's lots of Emily Ruths out there, but I'm Emily Ruth _. That's my Instagram. My website is actually down right now, but it's emilyruthcoach.com. Trying to think where else people can find me. Those are probably the big places. I do have a Facebook page, Emily Ruth Coach on Facebook. It kind of automatically posts whatever I post on Instagram. So that's kind of, but if you're only on Facebook, you can find me at Emily Ruth Coach on Facebook.
And tell us, I know we didn't get into this in the interview at all, but as a coach, what is it that you help people do?
Well, it's kind of a broad thing. I initially got into it as working with body image women who have had the experience. Maybe they've struggled with eating disorders in the past, or just not feeling at home in their body, like you shared. So I help women kind of step back into embodiment and feeling more at home in their body. But it's really branched out. It's a little bit more broad. I hate to call myself a life coach because I don't know that I feel like a life coach, but I'm kind of more of a life witness or a doula. I don't know if your audience knows what a doula is, but I was a doula for several years. Basically, a doula is one who stands with a woman while she's birthing. She's not a midwife, so the midwife kind of does the medical stuff. But if you have a doula, it's someone who helps support you emotionally and physically during a birth. And so I did that for many years, and it kind of led me to this space of just helping women articulate what it is that they want. So, and then helping them find the resources to do that. So, yeah, I don't know that I'd call myself a life coach. I'm more of like a life doula, but I stand witness for women, help them find what resources they need and support them in whatever it is that they're reaching for.
I think that was well said. And I think that is a thing. I've heard of death doulas. I'm like, why not life doulas?
yeah, right? I know. Yeah.
So I think that's perfect. Well, Emily Ruth, thank you so much for coming back today and sharing with us in all of its horrific and wonderful, glorious detail, the story of your life. And best wishes to you as it is ongoing as well.
Thank you so much, Shelby. I appreciate that.
So that's all for this episode of Coming Back. Thank you so much to Emily Ruth, my longtime Instagram friend and wealth of wisdom when it comes to grief and the body and coping with life's biggest transitions. Emily Ruth came back by searching for practices to get in touch with her body and by sharing her story with others. You can find a link to Emily Ruth's website where you can learn more about her coaching in the show notes. For grief support beyond this podcast, go to patreon.com/ShelbyForsythia, where you can pledge for as little as $1 per month and receive instant access to a monthly grief support hangout with me. The next one, of course, is Monday, March 25th at 8 o'clock p.m. Central. You can also apply for private grief coaching with me at ShelbyForsythia.com/grief-coaching. If you liked what you heard today, subscribe to Coming Back on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course tell a friend about Coming Back, because you never really know what someone you love is going through. Thank you to Mr. Eddie Goldstein, who composed our theme music. You can find me on Facebook at Shelby Forsythia, Intuitive Grief Guide, Instagram at Grief Guide Shelby Forsythia, or simply ShelbyForsythia.com. If you'd like to leave a question or comment for a future show, leave a voicemail or text 312-725-3043 or email me at shelby@shelbyforsythia.com. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you, I am proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you so, so much. Because even through grief, we are growing.